Happy to be back for another episode of our Central Valley PolitiCast. Now, I do have to issue an apology and maybe a revelation for some people in this group. We had Matt Klink, Tim Rosales, and Blake Zanny this morning. We had a power outage at the station, so we were unable to record the audio from that song. I don't want to suggest at all that this is a B team. This is the A team. I just figured all the professors were on summer break. I didn't want to bother them at all. So, you know, but and Brittany's great to join us here as well. So. I guess that's the first place to start is the biggest news that happened over this weekend, which is that Kamala Harris has been endorsed by President Biden, who is, of course, stepping aside to be the nominee. Is this a surprise that one, that he dropped out? Let's start with that first, that he dropped out of this race. Is that a surprise at all?
I'll take the lead on that one. I would say yes and no, that this is a surprise. Pressure has been building since even before the disastrous debate in June, but especially since that debate for Biden to drop out. The Democratic Party has been slowly escalating the kind of messaging to Biden that it was untenable for him to continue as the potential nominee for the party. But that said, it's really hard to step away, and it took some real courage on his part to say, I can't do this, and to finally admit to himself that it wasn't going to happen.
I would say,
Okay, go ahead, Brittany. Sorry.
no, I would say I 100% agree with that sentiment. Had I answered it first, I would have said yes and no. Because had you asked, right? I mean, seriously, had you asked me a month ago, I would say no way. If you'd asked me right after the debate, I still would have said no. But maybe I would have said no. But this news cycle is going to die down, and it never did, and it only got progressively worse. So no, I'm not surprised, especially since reports were indicating at the end of last week that the announcement would be coming as early as this weekend. So 3 p.m. Eastern or whatever ended up being announcement coming from Joe Biden's Twitter did not catch me by surprise at all. It's still obviously a huge announcement. I will say, though, I think that shows the strength of Nancy Pelosi, and I think it shows like who's really pulling the purse strings here in the Democrat Party. She got involved in this conversation, and at first being very diplomatic about it, and then things leaked that she said that he needed to step down, and guess what, a couple days later he said that he was going to step down. So I'm sure we're going to get further into some of those fundraising numbers and enthusiasm, but if Democrats, if this was 6 months out from election day, honestly, I'd say that Democrats are in pretty good shape. We're 3.5 months out now, but that is uncharted territory in the 21st century in modern politics. I don't know what that means. I don't know if Democrats can make up that ground game, but I will say that 70% of American voters didn't want a Trump or Biden matchup earlier this year. And so I think a lot of voters are finally getting what they want, and we'll see if that drives people to the polls.
I've never been happier to be part of the B team with these great colleagues. So thank you. I want to say that I'm going to take a little bit different view. I think the writing was on the wall about this the day after the debate when the Biden team didn't do much to alter that trajectory. And then a week later, 48 hours later, it took them 2 weeks to hold a presser. This was inevitable. This wasn't just about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. This was about a number of Democrats building. And certainly when Adam Schiff or Zoe Lofgren, two Democrats that are important in the caucus, start talking about the future of Joe Biden, they're channeling Nancy Pelosi, but it's much more than that. Also, Kamala Harris and her team for the last 3 weeks have been working on the plan for what comes next. And that's what you see with this slow rollout. So while you haven't seen the Obamas come out, Barack and Michelle, they will bookend this eventually. And really, it's these next 48 hours that matter. When the announcement is made at 10:46 on Sunday morning, and under the Democratic Party rules, under the DNC rules, the Rules Committee for the DNC cannot meet within 48 hours, but then can meet to discuss the delegate selection process and what that looks like for those now untethered delegates. That means they meet on Wednesday, perhaps Thursday. They were scheduled to meet on Friday. They're not going to take that long. That will then set forth the virtual straw poll, which will go sometime between August 1st to 7th. And this advantages only one person, and that's the vice president, because she and her team have been working on this with the tacit approval of the Biden administration. There's another component to this. If you look at Kamala Harris's Attorney General campaign, you look at her U.S. Senate campaign, you look at her ill-fated run for the president to be the nominee for the Democrats in 2020, she starts with a bang. She's done that but then she kind of fizzles out. So the short time frame, the short runway works to her advantage, unlike anyone else. Does she have a challenge? Maybe. It's not a coronation, but it is a place where she has an opportunity to sew this up in the next 48 hours, and then in the 2 weeks intervening, setting up the Democratic convention from the 19th to the 22nd. The problem, though, is that after that convention ends in Chicago on August 22nd, voting starts in Virginia less than a month later on September 20th. Not a lot of time. So that short runway helps her, but also can be a problem, as was mentioned earlier.
What do you make of that there was an endorsement along with the stepping aside? Is this I guess a good thing? Does it show strength within the Democratic Party trying to promote unity again for, I guess, a candidate who you can associate with President Biden on a ticket, but necessarily wasn't on the ballot herself in any of these primary races?
This is something they have been building for some time. Slowly, kind of in the background, the iceberg under the surface for what's been going on, because there have been worries about the president. It's not a surprise to those of us that have covered him or have watched him from vice president to now. That's not an issue in terms of what was going on. And the vice president and her team were aware of this, but her portfolio was narrow. It wasn't clear what was going on. And now she's the only one who's positioned to kind of run with this. Gavin Newsom was never viable because he doesn't have a national political operation. Also, Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris share the same consulting firm. So they're not going to, their consultants are not going to go that route as well. So there's certain kind of elements, I'd say, under the surface here that have driven this process, perhaps in Kamala Harris's favor.
The one thing I would add there, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the one thing that I would add there is that even, on the assumption that Biden doesn't step aside and that, pushes through for this campaign, Kamala Harris has been running for the 2028 nomination since she became vice president, right? So the organization building, the relationship building within the Democratic Party, the donor class, all of the operatives at the local level, right? She's been working on this for quite some time, originally with an idea for 2028, but now she brings it into play for this election cycle.
You have to keep in mind that there has been so much infighting within the Democrat Party for the last few weeks. And I like to say that one of the things that Democrats are a lot better at than Republicans is at infighting. And so I think that Joe Biden coming out and fully endorsing her shows that now it's time to get unified again. I mean, again, we're 3.5 months out from Election Day. There's really not a lot of time to mess around and to play games and try to get on the ticket. Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee, and that's just how it is. And they're going to have to get, I think, a decently moderate VP candidate here to join that ticket if they want to get some of those Republicans who feel like they are politically homeless, or those perhaps who aren't totally satisfied with the Democrat Party too. So I'm not surprised that Biden endorsed the vice president, and I think that you're going to keep seeing people coming out of the woodwork and supporting her prior to the convention.
I think Brittany brings up a good point in this sense that Democrats are really good at kind of the group therapy session and kind of displaying that. And you don't want to do that in Chicago this time out in the 21st century, because it'll make Chicago 68 look like a picnic if they were to do that this time out. So there is that component of kind of what's going on in the background rather than have the group therapy, warts and all, for everyone to see.
Do it on the inside. I feel like Pelosi is really good at doing that, even though folks still get unruly, of course. But, you got to keep it together, guys, if you want to succeed. But, we'll see if moving forward they're able to band together.
Well, you're seeing it now simply because all of the likely contenders who might have run against Harris have all started coming out endorsing her. So, the machinery is working. The party is consolidating. I agree with what Brittany said. I don't think there's any question that she's going to be the nominee going forward. So the party is trying to get it settled as quickly as it possibly can.
Well, we were thinking about Chicago 68 from a number of different perspectives early on. Number one is that you're expecting a raucous convention. Perhaps I know that the pro-Palestine supporters could make a similar impact than what the Vietnam protesters did in 1968. Now, all of a sudden, of course, it's even more of a potential similarity. Now, the fact that you're going to have someone who's the incumbent president vacating the seat for the nomination. several parallels now that we probably were expecting. It'll be interesting to see if the protesters play any role in this convention. What should we expect from that convention? Obviously, Professor McCune, you laid out the plan and what to expect from that perspective. But what role does the optics have on unity going into that event?
One of the issues that Democrats were concerned about prior to the debate was having a convention that might have virtual aspects to it. Donald Trump and Republicans were worried about this, if there was going to be, this is before the immunity case comes out relative to his guilty verdicts. And so party operatives were talking about a virtual components that included Zoom. For Democrats, that was about protests. Then they couldn't do that after the debate because then they'd be isolating and protecting Joe Biden. So there is this kind of component to it. The only other thing that I'd add to it is like, I don't think this is 1968 at all. I think this is 1860, 1963, 1964, and 1968 all rolled into one. That's 2024. That's what's at stake this particular time, especially as we roll into Chicago and afterwards.
I mean, there are parallels to 1968, but I don't think we're anywhere near 1968. Enough delegates to win on the first ballot. And so there was some pre-party maneuvering, pre-convention maneuvering. The candidates put forth some resolutions that were kind of shows of strength. And it was clear after the early votes that Gerald Ford was going to be the nominee and Reagan wasn't, right? So that's kind of where we're at. We don't have a strong Democratic mayor saying there's not going to be any protesting on my streets and mobilizing the police force. You know, I have no expectation that there's going to be literal blood on the streets in Chicago during this convention in the way that there was in 1968, right? So the social background is significantly different. That said, it's, you know, the first time for almost everybody who's watching this to see a convention where we don't actually know going in who the nominee is going to be. Now, that might change if the Democrats follow through on their kind of virtual poll so that they can meet the Ohio August 7th deadline for getting the candidate on the ballot, right? But that's really the only suspense at this point.
Two things that I want to add is one, I wish I could be there because I just want to watch the chaos unfold for myself because it's going to be historical no matter what. But also, well, you bring up a really interesting point when you're talking about the Palestinian protests. This week, Netanyahu is supposed to be addressing Congress again, and the vice president has already indicated that she will not be there. So those folks who were part of the summer protests or right before the summer ended when it was all the school protests on college campuses, some of those who are perhaps more part of the left-wing part of the Democrat Party, people were thinking and speculating, you know what, they might be the ones to stay home because of fatigue, because they're not really into Joe Biden. But now they have someone perhaps who is more in lockstep with their views, and that might appeal to some of those voters.
Right, whose husband is Jewish too, Doug Emhoff. So, you know, it'll be quite an interesting thing to watch. I guess before I want to go to the convention, since Brittany, you were there at the Republican National Convention last week. But before we do that, let's do a bit of a lightning round with a VP choice. Who is this VP? I imagine it's a moderate from the purple state, because that's what it seems like a lot of the names are. So
I'll go first and say Roy Cooper in North Carolina, simply because he cannot run for re-election again. His term is up as of the end of this year. So the Democrats are not giving up a governorship or giving up a seat if he wins. And then if he loses, he is out anyway already.
I'm going to say Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Obviously, it's one of the swing states. Lots of folks seem to like him, but I'm also going to throw into the ring. Sorry if I was only supposed to do one, but Mark Kelly from Arizona, you know, he's a national hero. He's also an astronaut. And we don't see anyone who has sort of that pedigree on the tickets this year. And I think that would be really interesting, specifically because Republicans tend to say, you know, military, national security, that those are our issues, but we don't have someone on the ticket for us that has that, but he does. And perhaps that brings some of the blue dog qualities that some of those Republicans on the fence might be willing to sway to.
Okay, you ready? If you're electoral vote counting, you go Cooper, you go Shapiro, Whitmer, you go Mark Kelly, right? Set that aside. Go message. The message is you want a heroes, not zeros ticket. You pick Admiral McRaven. who led the bin Laden raid, former special warfare commander. You go completely off about message. If the world is on fire, if that's the message from the Trump team, you go someplace where the vice president is weak. You talk about heroes, not zeros. Mark Kelly does meet that, but so does Admiral McCraven.
Right, someone who doesn't have quite a political background per se, but someone who I think has advocated policy in the past, and definitely a message, as you had said. Going over to the convention, then I'll take it back home to Central Valley politics for one last question. But Brittany, your experience at the RNC convention, what did you make of the speech if you were there in person for it? I know you were also there for the Nikki Haley speech as well.
Yeah, so I didn't catch Trump's speech in person. I did catch Nikki Haley's speech in person. You know, a lot of people have been giving her flag. You betrayed us. How dare you? But in reality, she was always going to support and endorse Donald Trump. That's just how politics works. And I know that people like to have ideals that that's not going to happen. But I mean, I'm not surprised as someone who supported her in the primary, who's a Republican and is not supportive of Donald Trump. You know, I wish he hadn't, but did it catch me off guard? No, not at all. The last thing I'll add on to that though is that, I mean, when we're talking about Trump, is he a new person and unity? And I changed my speech to be more reflective of the times. Is that true? No, absolutely not. Like, come on. When she was giving her speech and she said, "Thank you to the Trump campaign for extending the invitation to me and offering like me a spot here," the camera panned to him. I'm sure you guys saw it. He was like, "No, she asked to be here." Like, have some dignity and like some grace and respect. And as far as his speech himself, that I got to just watch from home, you know, hearing about the assassination attempt straight from him. I mean, it was absolutely horrific. I'm glad that he was able to talk about the families who were impacted, and of course, Corey, who lost his life. But ultimately, I don't think it was a message about unity. I don't think it was a message about like this is like specifically what I'm going to do. It was in very vague terms. Maybe it's not the time or place, but I expected more. And the last thing I'll add to that is if you're looking at the ratings and the amount of people who are tuning in, it goes in order from McCain, Romney, and then Trump, 16, 20, and 24. So he had the lowest ratings in however many years since McCain. So, no, I don't know. I don't know if we're winning so much.
Yeah, I mean, it was a Trump speech. You know, at this point, who Trump is. You know what he's going to say. It's going to be about him and almost nothing else. It's going to be about his grievances and about nothing else. And that's what we kind of saw. There were some vague hand waving toward unity and trying to be a president for everybody. But by the end, it was him talking about himself.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments of my fellow two panelists here. Look, you're not going to teach a 78-year-old new tricks. That's just not going to happen. So the fact that you can talk about unity and ripping up the speech, the political theater here, that's not who Donald Trump is. It's just not. And look, you know, Brittany wasn't there because she had 93 other things to do because he gave the 93-minute speech. So one thing that's going to happen is that viewership is going to dive. There is a fatigue about Donald Trump, but there's also an energy. I think pre-convention, it was a formality to go to that convention. After the attempted assassination, it was a mission. And Kamala Harris's entry into the race, if she becomes the nominee, also changes that dynamic. But you're still in a post-Labor Day bounce for both parties where this thing is going to be virtually tied, very expensive and very negative. And that's what we'll be watching. It makes that September 10th debate, that second presidential debate, must-watch television.
So can I ask if you all think that's actually going to happen?
I do.
Yeah.
I think they can bait Trump into it because he's not going to sit on the side, and it is going to be dynamite to watch.
Well, if our CBS and Fox affiliates have a simulcast of it, I say I absolutely hope it should happen. But as far as that's concerned, I think it's an ABC News broadcast. But
It is.
Similar to what you had mentioned there, I mean, tying this back home to Central Valley politics and about engagement and interest in this thing. By the way, the PolitiCast, the whole idea was supposed to be Central Valley politics. It's just we've had these wildest 3 weeks possible, so it's kind of distracted from it. But we visited this subject before in previous interviews, I think with all three of you. But it's going to be voter interest. What does this do for these competitive Central Valley races, particularly the Salas Valadeo one, close here to home in Bakersfield and up through Fresno?
I mean, on the one hand, it sucks the oxygen out of the room for the local contest because everybody's going to be talking about the presidential contest, and it doesn't leave space for the local candidates. And so, if you're Valadeo, that's great because you're ahead, you're the incumbent, you're in a good position. And if you're the challenger, it's hard to break through. But on the, as my colleagues have said here, it does breathe some new life into the election where before most voters were kind of keeping their heads down, holding their nose, hoping it would be over as quickly as possible. And now there's actually something to be interested in again. So it's a little bit of both, but yeah.
Well, we know that it's always easier to win as an incumbent, and that is, from the local level all the way to the office of the president. I think that, I'm going to be honest, like I love Valadeo and I want him to win and succeed. I think he's one of the best members of Congress. Does a very exciting Kamala Harris top of the ticket change things? I think potentially it could make it a little bit more difficult. I hope his team is paying attention to folks on the ground. The only reason that I say that is because if you look at just the fundraising numbers since yesterday, she had the biggest fundraising numbers, not just of the cycle, but was on track to break fundraising records for Democrats of all time. And that is voter enthusiasm. 44,000 people were on a Zoom call with her yesterday. Like people are excited. Sorry if I said this already here, I think I did. But a lot of people, like 70% of Americans didn't want a Trump-Biden matchup. And so now they're getting the opportunity to have something different. And I think where we would have seen more voter fatigue, people staying at home and not going to the polls, I think now perhaps that's going to incentivize them to get out and vote in November.
The good news is that the opportunity to win the House runs through New York and ends in California. It's those New York seats, like the old Santos seat. It's the Valadeo-Salas race. That's going to determine who has ownership, who controls the House of Representatives. Does it get lost? Perhaps. Now, presidential coattails have declined over some period of time. We will know a lot about these two candidates. We already know a lot about, obviously, Donald Trump. But the money that flows down ballot will be critical here. And that's not just in House races. That's also in Senate races and a few governor races. The key to, I think, all of that will be kind of voter split ticket they're voting. That will happen. There's a couple of things on the ballot that make it important in terms of ballot measures. There'll be local races that happen. There are opportunities here. It is difficult to unseat an incumbent, but Salas is not going to lack for cash. And I think that's back to Brittany's point is that, look, the down ballot cash is hugely important. And Biden was already sitting on $250 million. That's not all his money. Obviously, some of that goes to the vice president if she's the nominee, but a lot of that goes to party building activity and down ballot activity for the D trip and the DNC.
Yeah, and last question for you all. We already spoke about our influence earlier with former Speaker Pelosi and former Speaker McCarthy too. I know that they have the title of former and with one out of office right now. But in the same respect, it seems like they still play a vital role in fundraising across California politics and across the country too. It seems like this is something that's not going to end just based on whether or not they're in Washington, D.C. That was more my commentary aspect of it, but that was just
to speak about.
That was just a statement.
Sure,
Sorry.
I'll jump in here. Look, McCarthy is one of the most prolific fundraisers ever. I think the most prolific in the House ever over Pelosi. He is also very, very competitive. And I know that from working for him, but I also, if you haven't worked for him and you're just paying attention, I think people can tell like he likes to be, the number one person and raise all the money. And so I don't think he's going anywhere when it comes to that. I know that he's still fundraising. And so I think he's definitely going to have a hand in Republican politics for a while. As long as he wants to be involved, he'll continue to be involved.
Yeah, I would say the same for Pelosi. We all know Pelosi's influence, especially here in California. We know her ability to fundraise on behalf of the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. And as long as she wants to play a role in Democratic politics, she will have a place. She will have a seat at the table.
Hey, look, Kevin McCarthy raised over $750 million over his span for different Republican causes. That's $750 million. That's big money. And obviously the fundraising juggernaut that is not just only Kamala Harris, but also Nancy Pelosi, that's going to go hand in hand. I think that the difficulty on the Republican side might be the coordination through the Trump campaign to have that spin down ballot, because money that goes to Trump goes to Trump. It's not necessarily spread out like it was under Mitch McConnell or even under Kevin McCarthy. Big numbers there where they would spread their dollars around. Pelosi, a little bit different model in terms of what happens. It also has to be disentangled a bit from what Kamala Harris is able to do on her own in terms of setting that records. I think what all that adds up to is a record amount of spending. And Trump was outspent in 16 and 20. I don't know that that's necessarily the case this time out because of what's at stake, and they're kind of one shot here. So that means incredibly negative, a lot of dollars, and a lot of excitement, especially as we head to that next debate, if that indeed happens on September 10th.
We'll be looking forward to it, and we'll of course have probably one of these following it as well. I just want to say thank you so much for being able to do this on short notice. Look, it's not the B team; it was the summer school unit. I think is what I meant to say. We have our professors who are here. Brittany was in transit, couldn't make the first one, so this is great. No, thank you guys so much for being able to jump on and join me today, and we look forward to doing it again.
Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely,
It's nice to see you all.
Nice to see you.